We've got your question. Thank you very much for it. It does seem as though, Sian Berry stood down because, Shahrar, you were appointed to your position and you don't take the same views on these issues that she does. So inevitably, this whole leadership contest seems to have, just from social media, seems to have been dominated by this issue. So I'm going to come to you first on this. How do you answer Abigail's point? Are you transphobic?
No, I'm not transphobic. In fact, I am a friend of trans people. And I think it's very important, and there's a flip side to the characterisation which Abigail put, which is that women are feeling that political parties are hostile to their needs, interests and concerns, particularly around provision of same or single-sex services. And why is that? Because even a recent law court ruling on prisons made out that there is a conflict of sorts between the provision for transgender inmates and women, females in prisons. So that's the court of law saying that there is a potential conflict. So
Shahrar,
we need to negotiate, and we can't negotiate
Shahrar,
those spaces.
I think you can't just narrow down the argument to these points. If we want to campaign
finish?
on women's rights, can we take
Amelia,
on the austerity agenda that has
you'll
made
have
it
your
not
turn
accessible?
in a moment.
Let me finish. So, first of all, I'm as trans inclusive as they come, as is my party, and I'm proud of that. What we mustn't get into the business of...
But the perception is that you're not, and perception, as you know, is important.
There may be a perception, but even in Abigail, if I may directly address a comment of hers, that trans women are women, that needs to be qualified. That doesn't mean that trans women aren't women, but it's a statement of gender identity. And it's no good in politics just parroting slogans without looking at the actual statement and the meaning. Because women are also women, trans women are also trans women. And what we mustn't do is eradicate sex as a data collection. ONS as well had to put out in the Census 21 a revised guidance to make sure that people didn't mischaracterize their sex. Because guess what? And I have colleagues, because I work in medical profession, medical school, I have colleagues also who understand the importance of collecting sex characteristics in order to treat transgender patients.
Amelia.
So these two
rights
are not
you dodged the issue there. Do you believe that trans women are women, yes or no?
As a statement of gender identity. But that's precisely the problem, because if you state it baldly without any qualification whatsoever, that might make it sound like it's a statement of sex, but it isn't, because a transgender woman still will retain their sex, which is male. So let's not conflate sex and gender.
But that's the issue where, Amelia, you explain what the issue is, because you would not agree with that, would you? That you wouldn't caveat it in the same way that Shahrar has.
So I talk a lot about intersexual feminism, and I think it's really important that we are talking about how we come together to tackle the biggest issues of our time. We won't do that by dividing society. We won't do that by creating these divisive arguments that harm the most marginalised people in our communities. If you want to fight for feminism, fight for better investment into rape crisis centres, fight for genuine investment into domestic violence centres. At the moment, there's in some places a 9 months to 18-month waiting list for all women who have experienced abuse. How many of those women are still surviving their abuse after they haven't had the counselling that they deserve? Women's prisons are terrible places. They are violent places. We should be challenging the very premise of how prisons work in this country. If you want to care about sex and gender, fight for all women, because those intersections are important. So, whether it's a black woman, a disabled woman, a Roma woman, making sure that we are fighting as women, as a whole, it's important. You cannot divide.
There are three other candidates waiting to get in.
Because we don't have enough of this debate in our own party. So you've mentioned
been debating nothing else in the last few weeks.
But we don't have this debate.
Shahrar, this is not a debate. This is about people's rights. This is about people's fundamental rights to exist. If you're going to call it a debate, you are ignoring their rights.
What about the right of a woman in a rape crisis shelter in Scotland, for example?
So have you worked with...
No, let him make his point.
But I feel like, as a woman...
Amelia, I'm sorry.
Ian, sorry. As a woman on this panel, is the only woman on this panel who has access to services for things like for domestic violence.
I want to hear the point that he was going to make.
The point, but I feel like that as someone who has access to these systems, then I should have more of a say on what it's like to access them.
There are 5 people.
Let's just give a couple of examples, right? We have a refuge in Brighton. Rise, yes, which has been defunded because they weren't deemed to be sufficiently gender neutral. And that's women who have been deprived of an important service. We have an MSP last year, Andy Whiteman, just check him out. right? He had to resign from the Scottish Parliament because he felt unable to vote according to his conscience for an amendment which simply would have said this, that a woman who has suffered from rape, for example, has the right to request that their examiner should be of the same sex. Now, I regard that as a matter of basic human dignity, and I would like to hear from Amelia whether she agrees with me.
I'm sorry, I just don't think that bringing in these kind of points is helpful in the argument.
It's real life. Sorry, it's a fair point to ask. Should he have been forced to resign over that?
He wasn't forced to resign, he chose to resign, and I think that's a difference.
More important, how would you have voted for that amendment? I would have voted for that amendment. It's not transphobic to vote for an amendment which allows a woman to request that she be examined by somebody of the same sex.
Bring in the
would you have voted for that amendment?
Let's bring in the others. I think Amelia probably will say she wouldn't have voted for that amendment, but let's go to Ashley.